What kind of mother refuses to come home when her own daughter is fighting for her life in a hospital bed? I found out the answer 6 months ago, and it cost me my best friend of 20 years. This morning, that same woman was standing outside a courtroom she wasn't legally allowed to enter, crying, while her daughter sat inside next to me. Let me tell you how we got there. Renata and I had been close since college. She used to talk about motherhood like it was the only thing she was ever meant to do. The perfect nursery, the perfect birthday parties, the perfect Instagram captions. When her daughter Ren was born, I was there within hours. Our girls, Ren and my daughter Sasha, basically grew up as sisters, in and out of each other's houses every weekend for 15 years. So when Renata asked if I'd keep Ren for a week while she went to Tulum with friends, I didn't think twice. Ren practically lived at our place already. The first 2 days were normal. Movie marathons, way too much takeout, Sasha and Ren whispering and laughing behind a closed door the way teenagers do. Day 3, everything changed. I called Ren down for dinner and got silence. Sasha said she hadn't seen her since lunch. Something in my chest just dropped. I went upstairs. Her door was locked, which never happened. I grabbed the spare key, and when I opened it, I found her barely conscious, with empty bottles beside her and a note folded on the nightstand. I'm not going to describe more than that, because that's not really the point of this story. What matters is what happened after. I called 911 with shaking hands. I called Renata from the ambulance, sobbing, and instead of panic, I got a long pause and then, is it really that serious? Maybe she's just doing it for attention. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it, like that would make the sentence different the second time. At the hospital, doctors told us Ren needed her stomach pumped. Surely, I thought, that number, that specific clinical detail as would land. I texted Renata immediately. Her reply, changing my flight is like $200. Isn't that what nurses are for? I sat in a hospital hallway reading that sentence over and over, waiting for it to make sense. It never did. I took vacation days. I slept in a chair beside Ren's bed for 3 nights straight. One night, she looked at me very quietly and asked, "Do you think Mom doesn't love me anymore?" I didn't have an answer that wouldn't have been a lie in one direction or the other, so I just held her hand. Meanwhile, Renata posted beach photos captioned, "Living my best life." Renata finally showed up a full day after landing, tan, relaxed, and immediately asking about a suitcase she'd left behind, before she'd even hugged her daughter properly. When I explained Ren's recovery plan, her face changed. She accused me of parenting her child behind her back. Her voice climbed. "It was probably just for attention," she said, loud enough that Ren heard it from the hallway and froze, tears streaming down her face. "Are you serious right now?" I said. "You chose a beach over your daughter's life." Renata's answer was ice cold. "You don't understand what it's like needing a break from your kids." That sentence ended our friendship, not the fight. That sentence. When Renata tried to physically take Ren's bag, Ren locked herself in my bathroom, sobbing, refusing to leave. Renata's response was to pull out her phone and call the police on me for kidnapping. "Go ahead," I told her. "Let's see what they think about a mother who wouldn't interrupt a vacation for her daughter's suicide attempt." 2 officers showed up. I handed over discharge paperwork. Renata talked over me the entire time, spinning a story about me being obsessed with her daughter. One officer finally asked where the minor actually was, and I explained she'd locked herself in the bathroom out of fear. A female officer, Officer Reyes, coaxed Ren out gently. The second Ren appeared, Renata snapped, "Stop being dramatic. You're embarrassing me in front of people." And I watched both officers exchange a look that told me everything about how this was landing. They called it beyond their scope and brought in a caseworker, who recommended Ren stay somewhere safe for 72 hours pending evaluation. Renata agreed, reluctantly, only after realizing a scene in front of CPS wouldn't help her. While collecting Ren's things upstairs, alone with me, Renata dropped the act completely. "You think you've won? I'm going to destroy your life for this. She's my daughter, not yours." What she didn't know, my daughter Sasha was recording quietly from the hallway. On that recording, you can hear Renata say, word for word, "I don't even want to deal with a moody teenager. Do you think I enjoy this?" She slammed every door on her way out and left tire marks in my driveway. That night, my phone exploded. Mutual friends asking what was going on, because Renata had already started posting that I was unstable and had kidnapped her daughter. At Ren's next therapy appointment, she told me something that reframed everything. She'd found messages on Renata's phone months earlier, texts about resenting motherhood, wanting to disappear. That, she said quietly, was part of what pushed her to the edge that week. Around the same time, Renata's attorney filed an emergency motion claiming Ren's biological father, Daniel, a man Renata always described as a deadbeat who wanted nothing to do with his daughter, was suddenly seeking custody. We were stunned. With Ren's blessing, we tracked him down. When we finally video called him, the resemblance between him and Ren was instant and obvious. His story was nothing like Renata's version. He'd paid support for years. He'd sent birthday cards that were never acknowledged. When Ren was 7, he'd received a cease and desist letter claiming his contact was traumatizing his own daughter, a letter he now believes Renata fabricated entirely. "I never stopped trying," he told Ren, voice breaking. "I never stopped loving you." Ren cried for hours. Then she said, "I want to meet him." At the custody hearing, Renata sat beside an expensive attorney, smirking like she'd already won. The judge interviewed Ren privately, then granted us temporary guardianship, ordered Renata into psychological evaluation and parenting classes, and restricted her to supervised visitation. Renata's reaction right there in open court: "This is ridiculous. She's my daughter." The judge threatened her with contempt. Renata missed her first 2 supervised visits. She showed up to the third with expensive gifts, more interested in selfies for her parenting page than actually connecting with her daughter, a detail the visitation supervisor noted in an official report. What followed wasn't one big blow-up. It was months of smaller cruelties stacking on top of each other. A mother's rights support group Renata built online, filled with our mutual friends. A fake social media profile written in Renata's unmistakable voice, confessing that Ren had faked the whole thing for attention. Harassing texts from burner numbers that police eventually traced back to a convenience store 2 blocks from Renata's apartment, with security footage to match. Then came the financial piece, a fundraiser Renata ran for Ren's recovery, which turned out to be funding her own vacations and legal fees. That's when public opinion finally completely turned. The final blow came from people closest to Renata herself. Her own ex-boyfriend testified that she'd told him plainly that Ren was mostly useful for maintaining her perfect mom image online. A friend admitted Renata had asked her to lie to the court-appointed investigator. Piece by piece, the version of Renata everyone had believed in for years came apart in front of the same people who'd once defended her. At the final hearing, something in Renata actually shifted. She stood, and for the first time, said something that sounded less like a performance. "I've been focusing on what I wanted instead of what Ren needed. I'm committed to getting better, even if that looks different than I imagined." Outside the courthouse, she approached Ren carefully. "I know you don't believe me right now. I hope someday you'll give me another chance." Ren didn't say a word back. She didn't owe her one. 2 years later, Ren is thriving in college with a strong GPA, real friends, and a father who shows up for every visit he's allowed. She still sees a therapist occasionally. Not for trauma anymore, mostly just for normal life stress. She keeps minimal, careful contact with her mother, entirely on her own terms. I lost a 20-year friendship in all this, and some nights I still miss the person I thought Renata was. But what I gained instead: a fiercely loyal daughter, a father-daughter relationship rebuilt from nothing, a chosen family that shows up without conditions, was worth more than the friendship ever was. There's more to this story than fits neatly into one telling, so let me fill in a few of the gaps, because I think the smaller moments explain Renata better than any single dramatic scene could. For years before any of this happened, Renata ran a parenting page with close to 20,000 followers, built entirely around the image of the devoted, endlessly patient mother. Soft-lit nursery photos, captions about gratitude. Every post landed in my feed like a tiny paper cut, because I knew quietly how much of it didn't match what I actually saw at family dinners. Was I supposed to just scroll past it and say nothing? For years I did exactly that, because I told myself it wasn't my business how she chose to present her life. I remember one afternoon, months before any of this, when Renata showed up at my house with a gift bag completely unprompted. Inside was a hand-knitted blanket in the exact pale yellow I'd once mentioned loving. Except it wasn't for me, it was a preview of the one she'd knitted for Ren, and she handed it over watching my face the entire time, saying, "I just wanted you to see it before everyone else does." That's not clumsy insecurity. That's someone testing exactly how much they can hand you, and still call it a compliment. You might be wondering, the way I used to wonder, why I didn't cut Renata off the very first time something felt wrong. The honest answer is that family friendships don't work that cleanly. She was at every holiday, every birthday, woven into 15 years of shared history with our daughters. Ending it outright would have meant forcing everyone around us to pick a side long before there was enough evidence for anyone to actually see clearly. So instead I did the quieter, sadder thing. I slowly stopped sharing anything that mattered with her at all. Let's go back to the confrontation in my kitchen for a moment, because there's a detail worth adding. Right after Renata snapped at Ren in the hallway, her own mother, Ren's grandmother, pulled her aside and asked, quietly but firmly, "Why would you say that to her right now, of all moments?" Renata didn't answer. She just walked out to her car. That tells you something important. Even people who love Renata could tell, in real time, that something about her reaction was deeply wrong, long before any of us had the language or the evidence to name it. After the suicide attempt, the hardest part wasn't even the medical emergency itself. It was watching how quickly people around us defaulted to protecting comfort over asking hard questions. Nobody wanted to say the word neglect out loud about a mother everyone had watched post soft, glowing captions for years. Comfort, I've learned, is a currency a lot of social circles trade in instead of honesty. Daniel, Ren's father, told us something during one of our early calls that has stuck with me ever since. I kept telling myself I was misreading the whole situation, he said. I wasn't misreading it. I just didn't want to be right. I think a lot of people who eventually see someone like Renata clearly go through that exact delay, not because the evidence isn't there, but because admitting you were wrong about someone you loved means grieving a version of them that never actually existed. The custody hearing itself wasn't loud, and I want to be honest about that. Because if you're picturing raised voices and slammed gavels, that's not really how it went. We sat in a small conference-style courtroom while our attorney laid out a calm, dated timeline of everything. Messages, screenshots, witness statements, and Renata's own mother went pale reading it over her shoulder. What finally cracked the room wasn't our evidence at all. It was Ren's quiet voice from the stand, describing being coached more than once on exactly what to say about me at school pickups. You could feel the temperature of the whole room shift the second a child's account confirmed what the adults had spent months avoiding. In the months that followed, plenty of people expected a dramatic apology from Renata, and in truth, she never really gave one in the way you'd want for a satisfying ending. She mostly went quiet, deleted years of old posts, and drifted to the outer edges of family gatherings instead of the center of them. Her relationship with Ren today is thin, careful, mostly holiday texts and little else. And honestly, that's a healthier outcome than any of us expected. Because some relationships don't need a dramatic ending. They just need enough truth in the room for everyone to finally see the same picture. As for Ren, she's loud and busy now in the best way, buried in art projects and college deadlines, mostly unaware of just how close this all came to going differently. Some mornings I catch myself thinking about how easily I could have stayed quiet to keep one more family dinner comfortable, and I'm genuinely grateful that version of me didn't win. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and keeping the peace with the person hurting them? And if you have, what finally made the choice clear for you? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, stick around. Because next time I'll walk through the exact moment Ren decided she was finally ready to meet her father face to face, and what that reunion taught all of us about the difference between the family you're given and the one you build. If this story affected you, or brought up difficult feelings around suicide or self-harm, please know support is available. You don't have to navigate that alone. One more thing I want to add, because people always ask about it in the comments of stories like this. What actually happened to the friend group in the middle of all this? For a while, it genuinely felt like everyone had to pick a team, and a surprising number of people picked Renata's, at least at first, simply because her version came out first and louder. She had a head start on the narrative, and a head start on a story is worth more than most people realize until they've lived through losing one. Jessica, someone I'd known for a decade, texted me actual advice to just give Renata her daughter back, as if Ren were a borrowed sweater. Another old friend left a voicemail saying he was disappointed I'd come between a mother and her child, without ever once asking me what had actually happened. I didn't argue with any of them at the time. I just kept documenting, kept showing up for Ren, and let time do the slow work of sorting people into who they actually were. What eventually turned the tide wasn't a single dramatic reveal. It was accumulation. The same way water eventually wears down stone. A woman named Priya, who joined Renata's online support group out of genuine concern, started noticing inconsistencies between what Renata posted and what the court documents actually said, since some of it had become public record by then. She reached out to me privately, nervous, saying she felt foolish for believing things without checking. I told her she wasn't foolish, she was just someone who'd been fed a very convincing story by someone practiced at telling it. Within days of Priya raising questions publicly, several other members of that group quietly left, and a few even messaged Ren directly to apologize. I think about Sasha a lot when I look back on this whole year, because in some ways she carried weight no 15-year-old should have to carry. She was the one who thought to start recording in the hallway. She was the one who noticed the harassment account used Renata's exact phrasing before any adult connected the dots. She lost a couple of friends whose parents sided with Renata, and she got in trouble once at school for confronting a classmate who was spreading rumors about Ren. I asked her afterward if she regretted it. She just looked at me like the question didn't make sense and said, "She's my sister." What was I supposed to do? Nothing? I didn't have anything to add to that. She'd already said it better than I could have. There's a version of this story where I come off as some kind of hero, calm and composed through every hearing and every ugly text message. And I want to be honest that it wasn't like that most days. There were nights I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and just cried before going inside, because I was terrified of getting a phone call telling me Ren hadn't made it through the night. There were mornings I snapped at Rob over something small because the actual thing I was angry about had nowhere else to go. Holding it together for two teenagers doesn't mean you're not falling apart in private. It just means you've decided the falling apart happened somewhere they can't see it, and you put yourself back together before breakfast. If you take one thing from all of this, let it be this. The people who hurt the ones you love rarely see themselves as the villain of the story. In their version, they're the one who sacrificed the most, the one who's owed something, the one everyone's being unfair to. Watch for that framing early, in the small comments at dinner, in the jokes that aren't really jokes, long before it ever escalates into something you can't undo. And if you're the one standing in the hallway right now, deciding whether to open a locked door, whether to make the uncomfortable phone call, whether to say the hard thing out loud at a family dinner, I hope this story is proof that the discomfort is worth it. The people worth protecting are usually the ones too scared or too young or too exhausted to protect themselves.